It was an ordinary Tuesday morning when Julia, a small-town waitress, began her shift at the upscale café where she worked. A café known for its cozy ambience and celebrity clientele. She had seen famous faces before, politicians, actors, influencers, but nothing could have prepared her for the moment when Melania Trump, the former First Lady, stepped through the door. The room seemed to freeze as the familiar figure walked in, her presence filling the space with an almost electric energy. The buzz around her was palpable. Julia, like everyone else, couldn't help but steal a glance as the woman, known for her grace and poise, took her seat. But this wasn't just any visit. Julia had heard whispers before, about Melania's soft-spoken nature, her unassuming demeanor, and how she often stayed out of the limelight. What she didn't know was that this day, this very moment, would alter the course of her life forever. As Julia walked over to take Melania's order, she couldn't shake the feeling that something extraordinary was about to unfold. And it did. But not in the way she expected. It began with a simple exchange, the polite pleasantries of a celebrity customer and an attentive waitress. Yet, there was something more to this interaction. As Julia went to hand the check over, she noticed something strange. A small piece of paper, folded neatly and placed on top of the bill. She didn't think much of it at first. Maybe it was a tip, an autograph request, or a simple thank you note. What happened next took her completely by surprise. Julia unfolded the note, and her eyes widened. The words on the paper didn't just move her, they broke her. It was a message that no one could have predicted, and it struck Julia in a way she couldn't comprehend at that moment. Her hands trembled as she read the note, her heart racing. The words felt like a secret she wasn't supposed to know, a glimpse into a world she could never fully understand. But the emotions that flooded her were impossible to ignore. Tears welled in Julia's eyes as she stood there, in front of Melania Trump, whose calm presence contrasted sharply with the storm of emotions brewing inside her. In that instant, everything Julia thought she knew about her life, her dreams, and the world she lived in began to unravel. This wasn't just about serving a meal to a famous person. This was about a deep, personal connection that would change her forever. Julia stood frozen for a moment, the small piece of paper trembling in her hands. She had been a waitress for years, but this felt different. Something about the note was pulling at her, as if it held the weight of an untold story. She glanced up at Melania Trump, who was still sitting at the table, her hands folded neatly in front of her, gazing out the window. Her demeanor was as calm as ever, seemingly untouched by the world around her. But Julia couldn't shake the feeling that something profound had just happened. Taking a deep breath, she unfolded the note fully. The words were written in elegant, flowing script, each one carefully placed, as if chosen with intention. The note was short, but every word seemed to carry more than its weight. As Julia read, she felt her heart race, her chest tightening. "You've seen me on TV, heard the stories, but you don't know the truth. I've spent my life in the shadow of a world that doesn't understand me. I'm not the woman they say I am, but I don't know how to change that. Sometimes, I wish I could just disappear." The words hit her hard, far harder than she had anticipated. It was a cry for help, hidden beneath layers of fame and public scrutiny. The woman who had been the face of a nation, who had walked beside the most powerful man in the world, was, in reality, struggling with something far more personal: loneliness, identity, and the suffocating weight of expectation. Julia didn't know what to do. Should she confront Melania? Should she say something? She wanted to help, to offer comfort, but she wasn't sure how to bridge the gap between her and the former First Lady. She looked at Melania again. This time, their eyes met. The soft blue gaze of Melania locked onto hers, and for the briefest moment, it felt as if the world had shrunk down to just the two of them. There was no glamour, no entourage, no cameras. Just two women, one serving the other, yet somehow connected in a way that Julia couldn't explain. The silence hung thick in the air. Melania didn't speak right away. Instead, she reached for her glass of water, took a sip, and set it back down. Julia hesitated, then spoke up. Is it really true? What you wrote?" Melania smiled faintly, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. There was a weariness there, an exhaustion that spoke volumes. "You don't know what it's like," she said softly, her voice carrying an almost imperceptible tremor. "You can never know." Julia's mind raced. She had heard the stories, the rumors, the criticisms, the endless speculation. But this was something she hadn't expected. She had always thought of Melania as distant, as someone above the fray, unbothered by the gossip and the politics. But now, seeing her in person, in this vulnerable moment, Julia realized how wrong she had been. "Sometimes, I feel trapped," Melania continued, her eyes drifting to the window once more. "Trapped in a role I never asked for. trapped by the expectations of a country that only sees what they want to see. No one knows the real me. Julia, caught off guard, felt an unexpected surge of empathy. She had always admired Melania from afar, but she had never imagined the depth of her inner turmoil. It was hard to reconcile the image of the confident, elegant First Lady with the fragile woman sitting before her now. "I can't imagine," Julia began, her voice faltering. "But I see you. I see that you're more than what the world thinks you are." Melania's lips quirked into a small, grateful smile. "Thank you," she whispered. Julia's chest swelled with emotion. She had spent her life serving people, delivering orders, offering small talk, never expecting anything in return. But this felt like a gift. A moment of raw honesty between two strangers who, in that fleeting instant, understood each other in a way that few ever could. As the minutes passed, the conversation deepened. Melania spoke about the pressure of public life, the suffocating expectations, and the overwhelming scrutiny that followed her everywhere. She spoke of her dreams, her desire to be seen as more than just the woman behind her husband's success. Julia listened, absorbing every word, each one shaping her perception of the woman sitting before her. She couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. Here was a person who had everything: wealth, fame, power, and yet she felt more alone than Julia could ever imagine. "Do you ever wish you could just leave it all behind?" Julia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Melania's gaze softened, and for a moment she seemed far away, lost in her own thoughts. "Every day," she said quietly. "But I can't. I'm trapped in a world of my own making. And no matter how much I try to escape, it always pulls me back in." The words lingered in the air like a heavy fog, and Julia felt the weight of them settle in her chest. There was so much more to Melania Trump than the public persona, the one-dimensional figure that the media had crafted. Beneath the layers of designer clothes and perfect makeup, there was a woman with dreams, fears, and a desire to be seen for who she truly was. The conversation continued, ebbing and flowing like the tide. But no matter what was said, one thing was clear: Julia had seen something in Melania that no one else had. A vulnerability that had been hidden for years, buried beneath layers of fame and expectation. And in that moment, Julia knew that this would be a story she would carry with her forever. A story not of a famous figure, but of a woman who, like anyone else, longed for understanding, compassion, and, most of all, connection. The afternoon sunlight poured through the café's windows, casting long shadows on the polished wooden floors. Julia's heart pounded in her chest, the emotions swirling in her head threatening to overwhelm her. Melania had said it. "Every day, I wish I could just leave it all behind." But what could Julia do with that? What could one small-town waitress do to help the most scrutinized woman in the world? The sound of the door opening interrupted the tension in the air. A couple entered the café, their voices breaking the fragile silence between Julia and Melania. Julia stood there for a moment, frozen, trying to process the gravity of what had just been said. It was as if the world had just shifted in that instant. But then, Melania looked at her, really looked at her, and Julia saw something new in her eyes. It was almost as if she were seeing Julia for the first time. The vulnerability that had been buried deep beneath her poised exterior was now a soft, lingering presence. "I'm sorry," Melania said quietly, her voice trembling ever so slightly. "I don't usually share these things. But I just couldn't keep it in any longer." Julia's eyes widened as she realized the weight of Melania's words. This wasn't just a conversation about fame or politics. It was about a woman struggling with her own identity, drowning in the expectations of a world that didn't understand her. Julia had always known the stories, the headlines, the criticisms that came with Melania's name. But now, she understood something far deeper. Something the public had never seen. "I don't want pity," Melania continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't want to be seen as weak or broken. But I can't pretend anymore. Not with you." Julia stepped closer to the table, her heart aching for the woman in front of her. She had never imagined this, never imagined that beneath the carefully constructed image of First Lady, there was a person who simply wanted to be seen as human. Someone who needed to be heard, not for the position she held, but for the woman she was. "You're not broken," Julia said, her voice steady, despite the whirlwind of emotions inside her. "You're just you. And that's enough." For a moment, the two women simply looked at each other. Melania's lips parted, as if she wanted to say something more, but the words seemed to hang in the air, too heavy to speak. The weight of the conversation was immense, but Julia could sense something else now, a shift, a flicker of hope in the air between them. Then, almost as if the moment was too delicate to stretch any further, Melania stood up, her elegance returning in a fluid motion. She reached into her bag and pulled out an envelope, placing it on the table in front of Julia. "I want you to have this," Melania said softly. "For what it's worth." Julia's heart skipped a beat. She reached for the envelope, her hands trembling slightly, unsure of what was inside. As she opened it, a small card fell out, a thank you card, but with an unexpected message written in Melania's familiar script. "Thank you for seeing me, even when the world only sees what they want to. You may never know the impact of this moment, but you've made a difference." Tears pricked Julia's eyes, and for a brief second, she felt her own heart soften in a way that was almost impossible to describe. The world might not have understood Melania Trump, but in this small café, at this quiet table, two women had shared a moment of pure, unspoken connection. As Melania turned to leave, she paused at the door, glancing back at Julia with a small but sincere smile. "Thank you," she whispered, and with that, she was gone. Julia stood there, holding the card in her hand, the weight of the moment still settling over her like a blanket. She had started her shift as a waitress, simply doing her job, never expecting anything extraordinary to happen. But now, she realized that this brief encounter had changed her forever. The world might never know the full story of that afternoon, the way Melania Trump had revealed her struggles to a stranger. But Julia would never forget it. And in that moment, she understood something that would stay with her for the rest of her life. Sometimes, the most powerful moments happen in the smallest, quietest spaces. And sometimes, all it takes to change someone's life is simply being seen, truly seen, by another person. As the café filled with the noise of the outside world, Julia stood still, reflecting on the deep impact of a single conversation. A conversation that had changed the way she saw herself, the way she saw others, and the way she saw the world. Weeks passed after that life-changing encounter in the café. Julia often found herself reflecting on the brief, yet unforgettable, conversation she had with Melania Trump. It wasn't just the words that lingered, it was the weight of that moment, the unspoken connection between two women who had been strangers just moments before. It had reminded her of something essential, the power of human connection, of being truly seen. Julia had always believed in the idea of empathy, in the importance of understanding others, but this encounter had given her a deeper, more personal understanding. In that fleeting moment, she had learned that everyone, no matter how famous or powerful, carries burdens. Beneath the polished surfaces of wealth and status, people were still human, still vulnerable to the same struggles, the same need for compassion and recognition. The world often tends to compartmentalize people, reducing them to their roles or public personas, forgetting that there is more beneath the surface. Melania Trump, the former First Lady, had been reduced to a symbol in the eyes of the public. But Julia had seen something else, something raw and real. And in seeing her, she had realized that true strength comes not from the external image we project, but from the quiet, inner moments of vulnerability that we sometimes dare to share with others. For Julia, the encounter had sparked a renewed sense of purpose. It had shifted her perception of her own role in the world. She had always served others, but now, she saw the deeper impact her words and actions could have. A simple smile, a thoughtful gesture, a willingness to listen, those small acts of kindness could make a world of difference in someone's life. She no longer looked at her job as just a means to earn a living. It had become a way to connect, to make others feel valued, to remind them that they mattered. As for Melania, Julia wondered if that moment had meant something to her as well. Had she left that café with a sense of relief, knowing that someone had truly seen her, not as a public figure, but as a woman in need of understanding? She would never know for sure, but Julia hoped that, in some small way, she had helped to ease the weight that Melania had been carrying. The world can be a harsh place. It's easy to judge, to assume, to see only what's on the surface. But what if we looked deeper? What if, instead of reducing people to their titles or the roles they play, we took a moment to truly understand them? To listen without judgment, to see them not for what they represent, but for who they really are. Julia now carried that lesson with her every day. She knew that the next time someone came into her life, whether a familiar face or a stranger, she would see them differently. She would make the effort to understand their story, to recognize the humanity behind the facade. It didn't matter who they were. What mattered was that they were human, just like her. The note that Melania had written, the card she had left, had changed everything. It had shown Julia that sometimes, all it takes to change someone's life is to take a moment to listen, to acknowledge their pain, and to offer compassion. In a world full of distractions, of noise, it's easy to forget how powerful those small moments can be. But they matter. They can change lives. Julia's life had been forever altered by that single encounter, and as she moved forward, she did so with a renewed sense of purpose. She knew that, no matter how small, she had the ability to make a difference in someone's life. And she would carry that responsibility with grace, with compassion, and with the understanding that the greatest thing we can offer each other is not judgment or criticism, but love, kindness, and the willingness to see beyond the surface. As the story spread among her friends, co-workers, and even a few social media posts, Julia found herself surrounded by a ripple of positive energy. People started reaching out, not just to compliment her, but to share their own stories, their own moments of vulnerability. Some thanked her for reminding them of the importance of kindness. Others found the courage to be more open about their own struggles. And slowly, something beautiful began to unfold, a quiet, widespread shift toward greater empathy and understanding. In the end, the true beauty of this story wasn't in the celebrity encounter itself, but in the lesson it taught, the importance of seeing others, of recognizing their struggles, and offering a hand, no matter who they are. For in doing so, we might just change the world, one small moment at a time.